You stand before a gate so tall it swallows the morning light. The brass studs glint like teeth, and behind it the city murmurs, part prayer, part fear. You smell the mingling of rosewater and rust. The victorious army has just returned from war, parading through Constantinople's winding streets. They carry not only banners and spoils but trembling faces, women cloaked in torn silks, their eyes lowered, their futures uncertain. The crowd cheers, oblivious to what waits beyond those walls. You can almost feel it, the invisible boundary between triumph and torment. It's the Ottoman palace, where power wears perfume and mercy is a rumour. You probably won't survive this story, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You cross the courtyard, where marble paths still gleam from the blood of those who didn't belong. There's no welcome here for the conquered, only ceremony for their conquerors. Trumpets fade into the clatter of armoured boots, and the air thickens with incense meant to hide the stench of fear. The wives and daughters of defeated warriors are marched inward, their wrists bound with golden cords, a mockery of jewellery. Some whisper prayers in Greek, Albanian or Arabic, their words swallowed by the wind. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans truly saw these women as prizes or pawns, but to the trembling captives, the distinction doesn't matter. One of them, a warrior's wife from the Balkans, stumbles. Her veil slips, revealing eyes too proud to lower. A soldier smirks, calling her Ganymet, a prize of war. It's an old word, older than empires, one that turns flesh into currency. You hear her breath hitch as she's dragged upright, her fate sealed not by guilt or choice, but by the empire's appetite. The palace gate closes behind her, a sound like a sigh, or a sentence being signed. Inside, everything softens and darkens. Candles drip wax into bowls of crushed jasmine. The marble floors reflect light like still water. For a moment, you might think beauty lives here, but you'd be wrong. This is a place built to disguise suffering in silk. Servants glide by like ghosts, their faces expressionless, their gestures practiced to perfection. Somewhere deeper in the palace, you can almost hear laughter, soft, distant, and cold. It belongs to women who learned long ago how to smile through despair. The wives of defeated men were never executed. That would have been too merciful. Instead, they were transformed, reshaped to serve the very empire that destroyed their world. Some were sent to the Sultan's harem, others to noble households, their names replaced with Turkish ones. Conversion wasn't just demanded, it was performed, like theatre. A priest's daughter became Aylin. A warrior's wife became Hurrem. You can see it, can't you? Each new name whispered into her ear as a brand, not a blessing. There's a strange quiet here, a calm so heavy it presses against your chest. Even the fountains seem to whisper in code. You start to notice how sound behaves differently inside these walls. It doesn't echo, it lingers. As if the stones themselves remember the pleas, the songs, the broken promises. The Ottomans mastered not only the art of conquest, but the art of containment. Their empire didn't just expand by sword, it absorbed by silence. One quirky record, half rumour, half history, claims that before being sent to the harem, captured women were bathed in rose oil and honey water to cleanse their spirits of rebellion. You picture that, the irony of being purified by the hands of those who unmade you. Somewhere a eunuch's sandals slap the floor, somewhere else a door closes, quietly enough to sound like mercy. You take one last look back at that gate. From the outside, it's a triumphal arch. From the inside, a trap. And as the night settles over the palace, the line between the living and the broken begins to blur. You can almost hear the sighs of those who will never see sunlight again. The empire has won another battle, but for its new captives, the war has only just begun. You move deeper into the palace, where conquest takes on an entirely new texture. Gone are the battlefields of dust and iron. Here, spoils shimmer under candlelight. Every corner smells faintly of musk and myrrh, every corridor lined with guards whose eyes never meet yours. This is where victory becomes ritual, and ritual becomes cruelty. The wives of the defeated warriors are no longer seen as people, but as living emblems of Ottoman dominance. Their bodies, their languages, even their tears are rewritten into the Empire's script. You can sense it, the strange pride the Ottomans took not only in defeating their enemies, but in remaking them from the inside out. A scribe sits in one corner, quill scratching parchment. He's not recording numbers of the dead, he's cataloguing the living, their hair colour, age, and temperament. This is how the Empire measured value. Fair-skinned captives were sent to Topkapi's inner sanctums. Darker-skinned ones, or those considered too old or defiant, were distributed to lesser officials. One footstep could change a woman's entire future. You can almost feel her trembling as her name is mispronounced, erased, replaced. Historians still argue whether these classifications were acts of bureaucracy or cruelty disguised as order. The truth probably lies in both. To the Ottoman mind, conquest was an art, and its human spoils were brushstrokes. Some chroniclers wrote of beauty taxes, fees paid by generals to keep particularly striking captives for the Sultan's review. Imagine that. Your worth decided by how long a commander's gaze lingers. In one account, possibly exaggerated, possibly not, the Venetian ambassador described an auction held in secret. He claimed that after every major victory, noble families gathered behind latticed screens, while the Empire's newest captives stood barefoot on Persian carpets, silent, shivering. The most desirable were adorned in jewels taken from their dead husbands. Bids were whispered, payments made in gold or favour. The women were then led away to separate fates, some to palaces, others to exile within the same walls. You can almost hear the hush of silk as each transaction seals another life. There's a strange irony here. The Empire prided itself on being guided by Islamic law, which technically forbade cruelty and demanded respect for captives. Yet here, law twisted itself around desire until both became indistinguishable. The Ottomans turned mercy into a spectacle and sin into ceremony. Every empire has its contradictions, but few performed them as beautifully as this one. You pause at a courtyard. The moonlight cuts through the lattice, scattering patterns across the tiles like broken prayer beads. The women are gathered there, guarded, silent. You catch fragments of whispers, names of places that no longer exist, lullabies from forgotten languages. A few of them clutch tiny keepsakes, a ring, a scrap of cloth, a lock of hair, relics from lives now legally erased. One tries to speak to a guard, maybe to plead, maybe to curse. He doesn't respond. He isn't allowed to. His silence is his obedience. A quirky footnote from an Ottoman diary mentions that some captives were so young they mistook the palace for heaven. One scribe even joked that they enter crying for their fathers and leave praying for their sultans. You can almost laugh at the dark absurdity of it, how conquest, given enough time, repackages itself as salvation. As you pass through another archway, the air cools. The marble beneath your feet feels too smooth, too deliberate. Every surface here is polished to reflect not just light, but control. It's said that Sultan Mehmed II, after conquering Constantinople, ordered the enslaved widows of Byzantine knights to weave tapestries illustrating his triumph. Their hands stitched their own grief into the empire's glory. And when the work was done, those same tapestries were hung in halls where men toasted victory beneath their sorrow. You glance around and realise something. This place doesn't hum with cruelty, it whispers it. Slowly, quietly, efficiently. It's not rage that fuels it, but ritual. A system so polished that even despair becomes administrative. Somewhere beyond these corridors you can hear faint laughter again, perhaps the harem musicians rehearsing for the Sultan's pleasure, or perhaps the ghosts of those who learned to smile too late. Either way, it's the same melody. A song that says, conquest never ends, it just changes shape. You follow the soft shuffle of slippers and the rustle of silk down another corridor, narrower and darker than before. The air feels heavy here, perfumed but stale, like memory trapped in fabric. You can hear faint sobs echoing behind carved cedar doors. This is where the wives of defeated warriors are brought to begin their transformation, from women of power to possessions of the empire. It happens not through whips or chains, but through rituals dressed as kindness. They are bathed, perfumed, renamed, and re-educated, each gesture designed to erase who they were and prepare them for who they must become. Imagine one of them, a woman once called Helena, wife of a fallen general from the Balkans. She had commanded servants, hosted banquets, and prayed beside marble icons. Now she sits naked in a copper tub, her hair being combed by strangers who speak a language she doesn't understand. They scrub her until her skin glows, as if polishing away her past. The attendants murmur blessings in Turkish and Arabic, telling her she will soon belong to paradise. You almost want to laugh at the twisted poetry of that phrase. Paradise apparently now has walls and a curfew. The Empire was clever. It didn't destroy women's bodies. It colonized their identities. Some chroniclers say the process was called tezkiye, purification, not for cleanliness, but for conversion. Their Christian names were replaced with Ottoman ones. Helena became Halim, Sophia became Safiye, Katerina became Kadriye. Historians still argue whether this renaming was meant as mercy or control, but to the women it felt like an execution that left no body. You can almost hear them whispering their old names under their breath at night, trying not to forget the sound of their own histories. In one dusty record from the Topkapi archives, a scribe describes a hall of mirrors, where the newly captured wives were brought to practice posture and grace. They were taught to walk with quiet steps, to lower their gaze, to smile on command. You imagine the absurdity of it. Women once commanding courts now graded on how gracefully they could pour tea. A quirky anecdote claims that one captured noblewoman deliberately dropped her cup during her first lesson, muttering that she would rather spill empire than serve it. She vanished from the record soon after. The empire didn't appreciate poetry from its captives. There's something haunting about how efficiently power rewrites memory. One moment, a woman is the wife of a warrior. The next, she's merely a line in a ledger. Her dowry becomes state property. Her faith becomes optional. Even her grief is managed. If she weeps too loudly, she's punished for disturbing the peace of the palace. If she doesn't weep at all, she's praised for adapting well. Either way, she loses. You can almost feel the quiet rebellion building beneath all that composure. The Ottomans justified this system as the spoils of war, citing old Islamic rulings about captives, though scholars of the time debated its morality. Some clerics condemned it, saying faith must be chosen, not enforced. Others argued that conversion through captivity was still divine will. Historians still debate who was truly sincere and who was simply protecting imperial policy. But to the women in those candlelit rooms, theology was irrelevant. The only scripture that mattered was the hand that held their fate. And yet, despite the cruelty, fragments of their old selves survived. A melody hummed during chores, a recipe remembered from childhood, a hidden cross carved into a wall beneath layers of plaster. These small rebellions, though invisible to history, kept them human. You can imagine them sitting together in silence, sharing stolen glances, comforting each other with the softest smiles, tiny acts of defiance that no empire could document. By night, the palace becomes eerily quiet. The moonlight glides through latticed windows, tracing bars of shadow across their beds. You realise that the transformation isn't only physical, it's spiritual, psychological, almost surgical. The empire doesn't need to kill these women to conquer them. It only needs to make them forget what freedom once felt like. You listen to the hush of that great machine at work, the Ottoman system humming softly, turning queens into captives and captives into ornaments of power. And as you drift through the dim corridors, you can almost hear Helena, no, Halimi now, whispering her husband's name to the darkness, afraid it might be the last time she remembers how it sounds. You walk deeper into the palace complex and the air thickens with incense and secrets. Here lies the machinery of the Ottoman harem, not the fantasy painted in European postcards, but a living, breathing hierarchy of women and whispers. It's not a place of pleasure, it's an empire within an empire where politics hides behind perfume. The wives of defeated warriors are absorbed into this intricate web, becoming both prisoners and pawns. The harem is less about desire and more about discipline. Each gesture, each glance, each word serving the delicate balance of power between the sultan's will and the women who orbit it. The corridors twist like a maze, designed so that no outsider could navigate them without a guide. You hear laughter one moment and muffled crying the next. Servants glide past, heads bowed, their silver trays trembling under the weight of gold. The walls are painted with tulips and vines, symbols of beauty and obedience. But you notice how the paint cracks near the corners, as if even the plaster resents confinement. Historians still argue whether the harem was a prison or a palace, but but you can feel it. Perhaps it was both, switching identities depending on who you asked. You reach the inner courtyard, where dozens of women sit in ordered rows, embroidering silk under the gaze of the Kalfas, senior attendants who enforce the rules with smiles sharper than knives. The women speak softly in many languages: Greek, Persian, Arabic, Serbian, Circassian, but always glance toward the door when footsteps approach. You sense how fear becomes routine here, how discipline masquerades as grace. Every action is calculated, even sighs are censored. One quirky record from a European traveller mentions that the palace had a school for silence, where women learned to speak only when addressed and to express emotion without words, through music, scent, or movement. Imagine that, a university of quiet obedience. You might laugh if it weren't so chilling. A misplaced giggle could mean demotion. A raised voice could mean disappearance. The harem wasn't just ruled by men. It was self-regulated by women who had learned that survival meant becoming part of the machinery that consumed them. And yet, beneath all that polish, power pulsed. The Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, ruled this hidden world with an authority that sometimes surpassed his own. She managed alliances, arranged marriages, and occasionally orchestrated political purges, all from behind embroidered curtains. Some historians claim she controlled access to the Sultan entirely, deciding which concubine, which captive, which gift of conquest would grace his bed. The irony is almost unbearable. Women who had been enslaved now governing others through the same system that once broke them. You catch the faint sound of a lute playing nearby. A group of women practice a melody for the evening's entertainment, their fingers moving delicately across the strings. One of them, barely 18, hums along in a language long forbidden. A eunuch corrects her instantly, his tone polite but final. She lowers her head, and the song resumes in Turkish. You realise how thoroughly language itself has become another cage. Some say the Sultan rarely visited the harem himself. He didn't need to. The institution existed to embody his power, not his presence. The beauty of the system was its invisibility. The Sultan's control reached every corner without him ever setting foot there. Scholars still debate whether he knew the details of how these women were acquired or broken, but it hardly matters. The machine didn't need awareness to function. It just needed obedience. You pause by a small fountain at the centre of the courtyard. The water murmurs, reflecting fragments of moonlight. You imagine the women washing their hands there, the coolness offering a momentary illusion of purity. The empire, you realise, thrives on illusion, on beauty that conceals suffering so effectively that even those living it begin to doubt their pain. Somewhere in these chambers, a woman once named Helena, now called Halime, sits cross-legged, her needle tracing patterns she's been ordered to copy. Each stitch ties her tighter to the empire. But sometimes, when the Kalfa turns away, she alters the pattern slightly. A hidden rebellion woven in silk. A flower where there should be a star. A secret memory disguised as ornament. You can almost smile at that thought. The smallest acts of defiance often make the loudest echoes. And in this vast palace of silence, one imperfect stitch might just be enough to remind the walls themselves that not everyone has forgotten who they once were. You wake to the sound of a low rhythmic chant somewhere down the hall. The women are being summoned again, this time not for chores, but for the ceremony of unmaking. It happens quietly, almost tenderly, as though mercy itself were being performed. You follow them into a long room filled with mirrors, silver basins and incense that smells faintly of clove and sorrow. Here, each woman will lose the last fragments of her identity. Not her life, not her body, something deeper. Her name, her lineage, her story. The Empire calls it Devshirm for women, a spiritual conscription. You can almost taste the irony. The men's sons are taken to become soldiers of Islam, the women's souls are taken to become servants of the Sultan. One by one they're called forward. A clerk recites their old names, then crosses them out in ink so thick it bleeds through the parchment. He replaces them with new ones: Ottoman, soft, melodic, alien. Helena becomes Halime. Mara becomes Meriam. Fatima is chosen for one who never knew the Prophet but now must live beneath his name. The women repeat their new names aloud, each syllable trembling like a secret forced into daylight. Historians still argue whether this ritual was symbolic or bureaucratic, but you can feel the weight of it. To erase a name is to erase a past. To rename is to rewrite destiny. There's a superstition here, one the eunuchs whisper among themselves, that the mirrors in this chamber were enchanted. They say a woman could see both her faces at once, the one she lost and the one the Empire gave her. The legend goes that some refused to look, covering their eyes as the attendant spoke their new names, as if to preserve the last thread of their former selves. A quirky tale insists that a few mirrors cracked when women whispered their true names beneath their breath, as if the glass itself refused the Empire's rewrite. You glance around. The attendants move with eerie precision, each carrying a small bowl of ink made from burnt cloves and rose oil, used to mark the women's wrists with a faint sigil, invisible to the untrained eye. It's said this mark signifies both ownership and purification. You can't help but think how the Empire wrapped cruelty and beauty so artfully that even suffering came scented. One woman hesitates when her name is called. Her voice breaks halfway through, repeating her new one. The clerk frowns but continues writing. She's now Layla. The name floats in the air like smoke before settling on her shoulders, heavy, unwanted. You realise that what's happening here isn't a ceremony, it's erasure disguised as grace. Outside this chamber, their past lives are already vanishing. Families back home are told their daughters have died. Tombstones are carved for the living. Letters sent to the palace are destroyed unread. The Empire believes in clean lines, no loose ends, no grief that can be traced. You think of the irony. For all its obsession with order, the Ottoman system thrived on ghosts. The ghosts of names, the ghosts of languages, the ghosts of love stories rewritten by decree. And yet, for all the Empire's precision, cracks always form. Some women whisper their old names in sleep. Some carve initials into the undersides of their jewellery boxes. Others teach them in secret to new arrivals, passing on memories like smuggled relics. Historians still debate how much autonomy these women retained, but the truth lives in these small acts, the soft rebellions hidden under layers of silk. By evening the ritual is done. The women return to their chambers, their new names echoing faintly in the corridors, foreign tongues shaping their futures. You follow them past candlelit hallways and hear the faint shuffle of slippers, the hush of suppressed tears. Each step feels like the earth recording a story no one will read. You look up at the ceiling frescoes, stars painted in gold, shimmering under lamplight. Maybe the artists chose stars to remind these women that their true selves still linger somewhere above the Empire's reach. Or maybe it's just decoration, indifferent to their suffering. The Ottomans were masters of such ambiguity. Every cruelty framed in art, every domination disguised as destiny. As the lights dim, you sense that the real conquest isn't over land or blood, it's over memory. To take a woman's name and make her repeat another until it feels natural, that's not just control, that's alchemy. The kind that turns a person into property and calls it peace. You turn a corner and find yourself in a passage that smells faintly of sandalwood and iron. The torches flicker against black marble walls, revealing shadows that move even when no one does. This is where the eunuchs live, the Empire's most loyal servants and its most tragic creations. They are the gatekeepers of the harem, the custodians of silence, the watchmen of desire denied. The wives of defeated warriors never see the Sultan without first passing through their gaze. Every breath inside this world, every whispered secret is filtered through men who have been stripped of manhood yet entrusted with power. It's a cruel symmetry, and you can feel the bitterness hanging in the air like dust. The chief among them is the Kızlar Aga, the black eunuch, often a man taken as a boy from Sudan or Abyssinia, altered in body and destiny. He holds the keys to the Sultan's private chambers and commands hundreds of other eunuchs, both black and white, who patrol the corridors like ghosts in starched linen. Their sandals make no sound. Their eyes see everything. You realise that in this empire of control, these men, broken to ensure obedience, wield authority that terrifies even generals. Historians still argue whether the eunuchs were victims or villains of the system, but standing here, you can sense they were both. The harem's women fear them, respect them, depend on them. Eunuchs are their messengers, their jailers, their confessors. They deliver food, letters, and punishments with the same calm precision. The Empire, in its cold genius, made them both guardians and witnesses, neither fully trusted by men nor women, yet indispensable to both. You can almost feel the tension in that paradox, humming beneath the palace's polished surface. One quirky tale tells of a eunuch who fell in love with a concubine named Asiye. He would bring her pomegranate seeds during long winter nights, hiding them in folds of her embroidered pillow. When another eunuch discovered it, both vanished the next morning. Some say the Sultan ordered their deaths. Others whisper they escaped disguised as pilgrims. Historians still debate whether the story is true, but it lingers because it reveals something unspoken, the hunger that survives even after everything human has been removed. The eunuch's quarters are austere, low beds, oil lamps, Qurans stacked neatly beside folded uniforms. You imagine the quiet here, the loneliness echoing through corridors where laughter is forbidden. Some of them pray fervently, believing their suffering grants them purity. Others simply endure, counting days in silence. Yet, within the harem, their word is law. A glance from the Kisla Aga can seal a woman's fate as surely as a royal decree. One misstep, one rumour, and a wife of a defeated warrior could find herself reassigned to the laundry, or worse, vanished into the archives of oblivion. You can almost picture Helena, Halim now, kneeling to present tea as one of these eunuchs enters. Her hands tremble slightly. She never knows whether he comes bearing a summons or a sentence. He nods, expressionless, and leaves. The cup's steam curls upward like a prayer unanswered. In this world, even silence has rank. What's fascinating and cruel is how the empire turned emasculation into a career. Eunuchs could rise higher than most men, becoming confidants to sultans and tutors to princes. Power came at the cost of identity. Some historians claim that a few wielded such influence they decided matters of succession, and yet, for all their authority, they were never invited to the banquet of legacy. Their names rarely appear in chronicles, their lives end as footnotes. The Ottomans treated them as necessary instruments, guardians of chastity and order. But the irony is sharp. A system obsessed with control depended entirely on those who had been most violated by it. You can feel the moral vertigo in that realization, the harem's purity enforced by mutilation, its peace maintained through suffering. A record from the 16th century notes that during certain ceremonies, eunuchs led processions carrying silver staffs tipped with bells. The sound was meant to announce their presence, so no woman would be caught unaware. But you imagine another meaning. The bells ringing softly, mournfully, like echoes of something long lost. Each chime a reminder that the empire's greatest strength was built from human sacrifice, not of death, but of the slow, deliberate dismantling of self. You walk back through the hall, hearing the faint rhythm of sandals and bells, wondering which was worse, the women's captivity or the eunuch's obedience. In the end, both were prisons. Both were survival. And the empire, always watching, thrived on the spaces between them, those silent corridors where loyalty and loss became indistinguishable. The night settles over the palace like a heavy silk veil. Somewhere beyond the outer gardens, a call to prayer fades into the hush of footsteps and the creak of iron locks. This is the hour of the Sultan's selection, the ritual that determines who among the harem's many captives will be summoned to the private chamber, known only as the Has Oda. For the wives of defeated warriors, this moment is both curse and gamble, a chance to rise above servitude, or to vanish entirely into history's shadow. You can almost feel the tension in the air, thick and perfumed, as dozens of women prepare themselves for a fate that masquerades as fortune. The ceremony unfolds like clockwork. The Kalfas move through the corridors, whispering names in voices too calm to betray their power. The chosen women are bathed again, their hair oiled and braided, their bodies wrapped in transparent muslin. Perfume burns in brass censers, amber, rose, and a hint of smoke, the scent of surrender. They are not told why they were chosen, nor who recommended them. Sometimes the Sultan decides based on reputation, sometimes on whim, and sometimes because the palace astrologer murmured that a certain constellation favoured her. Historians still argue whether astrology truly influenced the Ottoman court, but in these candlelit hours destiny seems negotiable. One by one they're led into the Sultan's private garden, where fountains murmur and night-blooming jasmine sweetens the dread. The women kneel, heads bowed, while eunuchs stand like statues behind them. Somewhere behind a curtain, the Sultan observes. He does not speak. A nod from him can change a life forever. The chosen woman is escorted inside. The rest are dismissed in silence. It's not passion, it's politics. Every embrace in this palace carries the weight of lineage, alliance, and intrigue. You can picture Helena, Halime now, kneeling among them, her heart thudding in her throat. Once she shared a bed with a general who died defending his people. Now she waits for a gesture from the man who ordered his death. You want to tell her to run, but where would she go? The palace walls are thicker than mercy. A quirky account by an Ottoman poet describes the Hasoda as a room of stars, its ceiling painted with constellations so that the Sultan might gaze upward during moments of reflection. He claimed that the Sultan sometimes chose not the most beautiful woman, but the one who looked most afraid, believing that fear preserved innocence. You almost choke on the irony. Fear in this place is not weakness, it's currency. Inside that secret chamber, the air is thick with incense and silence. The Sultan's attendants hover unseen, ready to whisk away garments and extinguish candles at a glance. The woman's body becomes the battlefield on which empires negotiate with eternity. Some historians argue that the harem system gave women rare influence, that those who pleased the Sultan could wield immense power as Haseki sultans, or even mothers to heirs. But you can feel how hollow that argument sounds when spoken here, in this trembling darkness. Power built on captivity is still a cage, no matter how gilded. When dawn comes, the chosen woman is either elevated or erased. If favoured, she's given her own chamber, attendants, and new jewels. If not, she's sent away without word, her absence explained as transfer to another wing. Some never return at all. Rumour says they are gifted to pashas or executed quietly, depending on who saw too much. Historians still debate the truth. Records are conveniently missing, but the palace whispers no better. Every selection leaves more silence than survivors. The cruelty lies not in the Sultan's desire, but in its aftermath. The women left behind begin to envy the chosen, even knowing the cost. They start praying to be picked next time, convincing themselves that servitude wrapped in luxury is still better than invisibility. You can almost laugh at the madness of it. The empire's genius wasn't in domination, but in teaching its victims to crave their captor's gaze. By night's end, the corridors are empty again. The fountains murmur the same eternal tune. You imagine Halime returning to her chamber, the perfume still clinging to her skin, her reflection wavering in the bronze mirror. She doesn't know yet whether she has survived or been claimed. The line between those two things here is thinner than breath. And as the palace sleeps, you realise something chilling. In this empire, no victory ever ends. It simply changes its costume, from sword to silk, from battlefields to bedsheets, from conquest to consent so carefully staged it almost sounds like choice. Morning creeps into the palace like a thief, silent and uninvited. The sun spills over latticed windows, painting geometric shadows across the marble floors. You follow the sound of rustling silk and hushed conversation. The women move differently today, slower, more deliberate, as if each step hides a secret. You can feel it in the air, rebellion, soft as perfume, dangerous as a whisper. After all, no cage lasts forever, not even one lined with gold. The wives of defeated warriors have learned the palace's rhythms now, its patterns, its blind spots, the subtle hierarchy of servants and guards. Beneath the outward obedience, something stirs. It begins with small things, a missing hairpin, a note tucked beneath a cushion, a candle left burning longer than allowed. One woman coughs twice during embroidery sessions, and another answers with a hum, signals in plain sight. Historians still argue whether these codes were real or imagined, but you can almost hear them, the language of resistance spoken through glances and gestures. In a world where speech is monitored, rebellion becomes choreography. Halime, once Helenan, is at the centre of it. She's learned to move unseen, to smile when watched, to think in silence. Each day she memorises the guard rotations, the routes of eunuchs, the soft spots in walls where sound doesn't carry. Her past has been stolen, but her instinct to survive is sharper than ever. A quirky account from an Ottoman concubine's memoir, likely embellished, but too poetic to dismiss, tells of women who mixed ground pearls with ink to write invisible messages on silk. The writing appeared only under lamplight. You imagine Halim doing the same, her words glowing like ghosts, too faint for history, but too bright to be lost. By afternoon, the courtyard hums with tension. The Sultan is away, reviewing troops beyond the Bosphorus. It's the only time the harem breathes freely. A group of women gathers near the fountain, pretending to feed pigeons. One slips a small vial into another's palm, its contents a blend of oil and something darker. The palace records call it rose extract, but legend claims it was laced with crushed poppy seeds, a sleeping potion meant for guards. You can't help but smile at the audacity of it. In a place ruled by fear, even a few hours of freedom feels like victory. But rebellion here isn't always escape, it's expression. Some women don't want to flee, they want to be remembered. They paint forbidden symbols inside jewellery boxes, compose songs that sound devotional but hide protest in the rhythm. A lute player once performed a melody so haunting it made the valid sultan weep, unaware that its lyrics, translated from Greek, spoke of homecoming and revenge. Historians still debate the authenticity of that performance, but the idea lingers. Music as mutiny, beauty as defiance. The eunuchs sense the change. They become stricter, more watchful. The chief among them begins ordering surprise inspections, searching for letters or talismans. One night, a room is found empty. Its occupant gone, her bedding still warm. The official record says she was transferred to the gardens. The servants whisper she climbed the lattice and fell into the Bosphorus, her body never found. The truth, as always, is buried somewhere between those versions, wrapped in fear and rumour. You pause at a corridor and listen. A group of women kneels in prayer, their voices soft but resolute. You realise that even prayer can be rebellion here, a conversation with a god the empire can't censor. Maybe that's why the Ottomans feared their silence more than their screams. You can almost feel the empire tightening its grip, trying to suffocate the very thing it accidentally created, willpower. One night, when the candles burn low, Halim whispers to her companions about her husband, the warrior who died fighting the same empire she now serves. She doesn't cry. Instead, she laughs softly, almost mockingly, and says, "If they wanted to break me, they should have killed me." The others stifle their smiles. Laughter, after all, is the most dangerous sound in a place built on control. Rebellion in the harem never erupts in flames, it seeps like water through cracks. Some historians dismiss it as myth, claiming the women's influence was confined to gossip, not resistance. But gossip here is resistance. A rumour planted at the right moment could ruin a vizier, shift the sultan's mood, or unravel a policy. Power in silk gloves is still power. As the night deepens, you see it clearly. The harem as both prison and parliament, a hidden world where women wielded the only weapons allowed to them: wit, patience, and memory. Their rebellion wasn't a scream. It was a hum that never stopped. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Faint, rhythmic, defiant, echoing beneath centuries of silence. By the time you reach the far end of the palace, the corridors are quieter, emptier, almost peaceful. It's an illusion, of course. Peace here is just the sound absence makes when it becomes permanent. This is where the vanished women are kept, or at least where they are remembered, if remembered can still mean being reduced to inventory. The wives of defeated warriors who disobeyed, spoke too loudly, or simply fell out of favour were removed from the palace's inner circle and reassigned to the shadows. Officially they are transferred to service, but everyone knows what that means. The empire didn't bury its inconvenient women in graves, it buried them in silence. You pass through an archway draped in faded velvet and enter what looks like a storage hall. Rows of chests line the walls, labelled in neat Arabic calligraphy. Belongings of Halime Hanum, property of Safiye, articles of Maryam. Inside each box, fragments of lives, bracelets, prayer beads, hair combs, scraps of embroidered cloth. The empire catalogued them meticulously, but never their fates. Historians still argue whether these women were executed, exiled, or quietly sold to distant provinces. The ledgers don't say, they end mid-sentence, as if history itself decided they were no longer relevant. You can almost see one of them, Halimi perhaps, walking down this corridor for the last time, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. She carries nothing. Even her name has been confiscated. The eunuchs don't meet her eyes. There is no farewell, no acknowledgement, only the faint echo of her sandals as she disappears into the outer courtyard where the garden meets the sea. Some say she was sent to a pasha's household in Bursa. Others whisper she jumped into the Bosphorus before the boat could depart. Both stories feel true, and maybe that's the point. When a person's existence becomes legend, truth stops mattering. In another dusty corner of the archives, a record mentions the weeping chambers, small rooms built near the servants' quarters where disgraced women were confined for days. They were allowed to cry but forbidden to speak. A curious traveller once claimed to hear voices through the walls at night, songs sung in Greek, prayers whispered in Armenian, lullabies from lands the empire had erased. He thought it was haunting. You know better. It was memory refusing to die. A quirky story, half rumour, half satire, tells of a janissary who fell in love with a vanished harem woman. Every evening he would leave a pomegranate by the gate of the servants' garden. One morning, the fruit was gone. The next day, another appeared, this time carved with tiny letters spelling "still alive." When he boasted about it to his comrades, the messages stopped. No one ever found her again. Historians dismiss it as folklore, but you can't help imagining her smile as she etched that message, if only to remind someone she once existed. The palace has its own way of digesting the forgotten. New women arrive and old ones disappear, the rhythm steady as breathing. The tapestries are rewoven, the records rewritten. Even the language evolves, smoothing away the jagged edges of cruelty. The chroniclers describe the harem as a garden of virtue, its women as flowers tended by divine order. You almost laugh at that, the kind of poetry that grows only where truth has been starved. Sometimes, on certain nights, servants claim to see flickers of movement in the oldest wing of the palace. They say the air turns cold, the oil lamps gutter, and the faint sound of anklets echoes through empty halls. The eunuchs cross themselves, muttering that the ghosts of the vanished have returned to reclaim their names. Historians roll their eyes, of course, calling it superstition. But you can feel it, the weight of those unrecorded souls pressing against the walls, whispering through the cracks. The empire might have silenced them, but it never erased their presence. And so the harem continues, layer upon layer of memory and erasure. The women's stories dissolve into rumour, then into dust, then into silence. But silence is not absence, it's resistance in disguise. The Ottomans built palaces to outlast centuries, yet the one thing they could never contain was remembrance. It leaks through the marble, through the very stones, through the sea breeze that still brushes against Topkapi's terraces today. You stand there, surrounded by all that vanished beauty, and realise something unsettling. History doesn't forget people, it forgets their pain. It polishes the cruelty until it shines like legend, and if you listen too closely you might hear the faintest laughter, a reminder that the ghosts of the harem are not grieving anymore. They're mocking the empire that thought it could own them forever. The palace is quieter now. The moon hovers low over the Bosphorus, turning the marble courtyard silver and still. You wander through the same corridors where laughter, prayer and defiance once mingled, though now they echo only with your footsteps. The empire that built these walls has long crumbled into dust, but its ghosts remain, the wives, the captives, the mothers who lived and vanished under its rule. You can almost feel them brushing past you, a chill against your arm, a whisper in a language time forgot. Their stories were never written, yet they survived, hidden in the cracks between marble tiles, in the breath of the wind that moves through broken latticework. You pause by a courtyard where weeds sprout between stones. Once this was the harem's garden, a place of forced serenity, where women walked in circles under watchful eyes. Now vines reclaim the fountains, and nightingales nest where eunuchs once stood guard. The empire tried to immortalize power through architecture, but the only thing that endures here is nature and memory. You think about how these women lived, how they learned to smile when they wanted to scream, how they wove rebellion into embroidery and turned captivity into art. The harem wasn't just a prison, it was a strange kind of civilization, one ruled by silence but sustained by wit, grace and endurance. Historians still argue whether these women were victims or survivors, but maybe they were both, existing in the impossible space between. You can imagine Halim's ghost standing here, looking out over the Bosphorus. Once Helena, once a wife, once a captive. She no longer belongs to any empire, religion or record. Her name shifts like the tide, impossible to hold. Somewhere across the water, ships pass where Ottoman galleys once sailed, their lights flickering like candles on a distant altar. You realise that the women who lived here were not forgotten because of silence. They were forgotten because their power frightened history. It's easier to remember sultans and wars than to face the quiet courage of those who endured what no one wrote down. A quirky superstition says that if you visit Topkapi Palace at night and stand near the old harem gate, you'll hear soft voices in the wind, laughter, sometimes singing, sometimes sighs. Locals say it's just the sea, but those who know the old stories believe it's the sound of the women reclaiming their place in the night. You stand there a moment longer, listening. The sound isn't sorrowful. It's steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat continuing after death. You glance up at the ornate towers, now hollowed and quiet, and realise the Empire's greatest mistake wasn't its cruelty. It was its confidence that memory could be controlled. The Ottomans believed erasure was victory. They never imagined that centuries later people would still speak the names they tried to bury. Helena, Halime, Safiye, Layla. The women who outlived their captors, if only through the stubbornness of remembrance. You almost smile because that's how history works. It always finds a way to whisper what the conquerors wanted silenced. The air grows colder, but softer too. The moonlight fades into the faint orange glow of dawn. You take one last look at the palace and feel the weight of its beauty, its horror, its contradictions. You know now that the story of these women isn't about suffering alone. It's about survival so complete that it becomes legend. They were never truly erased. They're still here, in every breath of sea wind, in every shadow that crosses the marble. And as the first call to prayer ripples across the waking city, you understand. What they endured was worse than death, but what they left behind was stronger than empire. And now, as the last echoes of their footsteps fade, the palace grows distant, folding itself back into the quiet of history. You exhale slowly, feeling the story dissolve like mist around you. The marble halls, the flickering lamps, the whispers, they all blur into a soft hum, like a lullaby played through time. The women you met tonight are at rest now, their names drifting gently through the dark, unbound by walls or memory. Whatever cruelty sought to erase them has long since crumbled, leaving only their resilience behind, a steady heartbeat beneath centuries of silence. So let the sounds of their world fade into the rhythm of your own breathing. Let your eyes grow heavy, your thoughts slow and soften. You've walked through shadow and sorrow, and now there's only calm. The sea outside their palace still moves, eternal and forgiving. Maybe that's how history heals, not by forgetting, but by learning to listen more gently. Sleep well, dream softly. The ghosts of the harem are quiet now,